Right, I'm now going to ask David Hillman to address us. Dave is the Director of Stamp Out Poverty. Since 2005, he's led its work advocating a financial transaction tax, including the establishment of the Robin Hood tax campaign.
Thank you, Patrick. It's an honour and a pleasure to be on this panel for the launch of this paper. And thank you, John, for saying that the Labour Party will accept the recommendations of this paper. That is very good news. And also to be, reunited with Avinash and Stephanie. We've been on quite a journey over the last 15 years. A journey which has seen James Tobin's currency transaction tax proposal from the 1970s revisited in the 1990s as a result of the Southeast Asian crisis, where its motivation was as a regulatory instrument to put, as mentioned before, sand in the wheels to disincentivize the aggressive behavior of financial actors to profit from deliberately engineering the devaluation of currencies. From the start of our involvement, a few years later, Stamp Out Poverty sought to work with experts who had worked in the financial world. And that's how the engagement came with Avinash at that famous forum that the Cooperative Party set up. Do you remember that? In 2004. And recalling the preliminary work to calibrate the tax by Sony Kapoor, also worked in the banking sector. And not long after that, a couple of years after that, the UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon was talking about the need to tax foreign exchange transactions to help pay for the Millennium Development Goals, using Sony Kapoor's figures on the world stage. So in the period of 2005 to 2009, saw our collective efforts, Stephanie mentioned that, working as part of the leading group, which culminated in France becoming a country champion, first focused on FX trading, of taxing FX trading, but with the financial crisis, more broadly on the taxation of financial transactions more generally, especially taxing the relatively new kid on the block, derivatives. And all this work was effectively taking a fairly obscure policy idea, Tobins Tax, and bringing it into the mainstream. And a key litmus test of that was at the 2009 G20 summit in Pittsburgh, almost 10 years ago to the month, when the G20 tasked the IMF to write a report on how the financial sector could make a fair and substantial contribution to pay for the financial crisis, which it had after all caused. About half of that IMF report was devoted to an assessment of the FTT. And I think it's very hard to underestimate how important that one document was in mainstreaming the FTT. And it set the stage for France, Germany, Italy, Spain, and 7 other European states to commit to a regional transaction tax. Now, along that path, France and Italy have implemented unilateral financial transaction taxes. In Germany, the FTT was a pillar of the coalition agreement between the SPD on the left and the CDU on the right. And let me indulge this point for a second. When the European FTT project started, it was championed by Chancellor Merkel of Germany and former President Sarkozy of France. Not typically characterized as figures on the left, I think you would agree. And that's because the FTT does not inhabit the world of left and right. It inhabits the world of what is sensible and timely. Which is not surprising if we consider, and I think this is, this was referred to by Avinash, it's not surprising if we consider the history of the FTT in terms of pedigree. The stamp duty that underpins the FTT actually predates income tax. The provenance, as mentioned before, is in Keynes and the general theory, from which Nobel Prize winning economist James Tobin developed the idea. And to complete the story of how this idea was mainstreamed, who would have thought that by just dropping the T from Tobin and putting an R in its place would make such a difference? Because, as many of you know, in 2010, we gave a popular face to this work with the birth of the Robin Hood tax campaign, ably assisted by the writer and filmmaker Richard Curtis and the wonderful actor Bill Nighy, with a great launch film. I don't know if you've seen it, but if you haven't seen it, if you're taking notes, please take a note to see the Banker film, which is on YouTube. You just put in Bill Nighy, Banker, and an amazing launch film which has been seen by millions. And this helped spawn campaigns from the US to Australia. In Europe, we delivered a 1 million-strong petition, and to parrot the words of a well-known lager advert, the FTT is probably the most popular tax in the world. And I think it's worth saying as well that, right now, a third of all Democrat candidates for the current presidential nomination have the FTT in there on their ticket. So I'm going to keep my words short, so there's a chance for Q&A. But to wrap up, for me, who has been involved in this journey for such a long time, to be speaking at the launch of this paper that has brought us full circle back to the taxation of foreign exchange means a lot personally. It is, as we've heard, about making the modernization of our current FTT, the stamp duty on shares, universal, comprehensive. And it is critically about FTTs playing a catalytic role in the reorientation of financial activity towards the long term from the short term. Which only leaves me one final thing, which may have been preempted by what you said earlier, but just to confirm, in case I misheard you, as Shadow Chancellor, is it right that you are taking into Labour policy for the manifesto the recommendations of this paper? Because if it is, that is really good news. That means in total 35 billion in additional revenue with Avinash's paper of 2017. That's 25 billion with the taxation of foreign exchange and commodities, a further 10 billion. 35 billion over the course of a 5-year parliament. What a great difference that could make for the many. Thank you.